All right, hello everyone. So Chase, Brian, I think that if nothing else that this past week showed us, it's that clearly people on both sides of the aisle are dissatisfied with the way that the country is being run. So Chase, my first question for you is, what do you think the role is of business here to step in and advance society, specifically for you at Koch, in a time where people are just so dissatisfied with the way politicians and the government has been being run?
I think it's a great question, and it's a question that's not asked very often of like, what is the role of business in society? And the way we think about it, at least, is it's pretty simple: value creation. Create value and do things that improve people's lives. And so part of Koch's vision, we bake this right into our vision statement, and it informs all of our decisions. It's, raw materials are scarce, so are you making products and resources and services that create more value than the raw materials that go into them, while always consuming fewer resources over time and in a way that improves people's lives? So as I said, whether it's a new product that's coming out of R&D, it's an acquisition we do, everything has to meet that test. I think the other thing in the role of business, a second role that's really important, is what leaders do for their employees, and we call it empowerment, right? So empower your people. And this ties into the philanthropic side as well, because if you're focused on trying to help everyone understand their gift and then design a role around people's gifts, you're going to have the best chance of succeeding and helping them unlock their potential in that gift as well. So maybe just a couple of examples around that on how we think differently about this and trying to, like our whole talent strategy around empowering people. The first thing is we think about values first, skills second. So, and credentials last. You may look at, large employer like Koch, over 100,000 employees. How do you do that, right? Don't you just sift through resumes and, it's got to be a 3.5 or higher? We do our best to really kind of disrupt that idea and just go find people based on raw material, on values. I call it the go hire the farm team, because kids that have worked on the farm and that have good values and are contribution motivated, those are the people that we want at Koch. And the second thing I would say on that is that's different is basically how not only looking at looking at resumes, but trying to find people that potentially have been through something in their life, right? That maybe have had a past something on their record. And our approach on that, years ago, we decided to actually ban the box. And to where because we don't believe anyone should be, for the worst thing that they've done in their life, actually be looked at that for the rest of their life, right? And so we banned the box a few years ago to give
And what does that
more.
mean, ban the box?
So ban the box for people that have had a prior felony or prior something on their record.
Yeah.
And what we found in that is that since they don't have alternatives with a lot of other companies, that they're some of the most contribution motivated people and want that second chance to actually add value and deliver. And so we've had great success with that as well.
Amazing. And Brian, for you, as a philanthropic organization, how do you feel that businesses should be engaging with their philanthropic arms to advance society, if at all?
Yeah, you mentioned the dissatisfaction that people have that we saw in the election last week. I think it's all about making the most out of the opportunities in the economy. We heard a lot already today about the potential for technology to dramatically transform our society for the better, while making sure that the millions of Americans who are looking at that pace of change feel like they're not going to be left behind. And so to me, these categories of philanthropy and business turn out not to be all that useful, right? I mean, I think both of them have a really important role to play in making sure that everyone can see themselves in the positive transformation of our economy, but they've got to work together. And so you think about what Chase just talked about, and you kind of expand that to society scale. If employers are sort of sending the demand signal into the market for education. But they continually tell people that the best jobs are going to be reserved for those who have a 4-year college degree, for instance. And yet the economy is moving so fast that it's pretty impractical for somebody in their late 20s, let alone mid-40s, to go get reskilled through a 4-year college degree. Yeah. And there's probably a bunch of teenagers also saying, geez, I wish I could contribute right now, and the 4-year degree is probably not the right pathway for me. As long as employers are sending the demand signal that that's what we value, organizations like Stand Together that are supporting dozens of really incredible alternative pathways that help people to figure out what skills do they have, what do they need to do in pretty short order to build on those skills to be able to participate in the economy. We could do that. We do dozens now. We could do 10 times as much of what we do. But if employers aren't participating in this sort of transformation, they're never actually going to achieve it at scale, right? And so if employers say, look, we value those alternative credentials, those micro-credentials, those demonstrations of other skills beyond sort of the traditional pathway, then they're going to help to transform the market. There's a huge demand. Philanthropy can help to fill that with supply.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think one of the things that I find most interesting and that we all can identify with here is that humans come with a lot of bias. They come with a lot of personal bias, political bias. It happens to all of us. Chase, I know, for example, your family has historically aligned themselves with more conservative causes. So my question for you is, how exactly do you choose which policies and causes to support, and how do you balance that with personal beliefs you may have?
Yeah, I mean, I think Stand Together is obviously where we do our philanthropy. And I think where we focus from a policy standpoint, and let me first say that I think we've been probably mischaracterized in terms of the focus on politics. It is a focus, but I think most people think that's the main focus, and it's actually less than 10% of what we do. When you look at Stand Together, as Brian described, and Brian leads the organization, but it's focused on addiction, mental health, disrupting violence, education, but there is a policy, obviously, element to that as well. I think the way we look at that is like, where can we actually make a difference, where there's the biggest problem and the biggest barrier that's holding people back. Brian can talk a lot about from education standpoint, where we've focused on really a vision of how do you transform education from being a one-size-fits-all approach, as I think many of us have, in K through 12, many of us have experienced and been through, and so many kids are still kind of stuck in that system as opposed to a system that looks at individualized education. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our work and a lot of our policy work, we prioritized that over the last several years because we thought that's where we can make the most impact, and that's where we have the most capability.
I think that's right. I think these ideas of left, right, conservative, liberal, they're just not all that useful anymore in approaching the problems that are really holding people back.
So the current administration, you think you wouldn't change it one way or the other? Or?
I think if you look to politics to solve most of our problems, we are going to consistently be disappointed with the result, no matter who's in office. Yes. So there's a ton of work that needs to be done in society. And when you kind of put those labels aside and you just say, let's be solutions focused. We don't want public education or private education. We want good education, and good education can exist everywhere. People sort of perk up and they listen. And so, at Stand Together, as Chase said, we were founded by Charles Koch 20 years ago, but we now have about 1,000 business leaders and thousands of social entrepreneurs that have all sort of signed up to this organization. We help to identify potential solutions to big problems. We put together significant strategies and then invite philanthropists and business leaders to participate in those strategies. And the thing that makes it so easy for people, even those who have misconceptions about where we might be politically or where we've come from, to join and really get engaged is they see it works. And we're solving problems that they care about, and we do it by working together and frankly applying a lot of the lessons, a lot of the insights that drive the businesses that have made them so successful and allowed them to participate in these solutions.
Tell me about that, because I think it's interesting that you both say that you take a business approach to philanthropy. So what does that mean? What are the risks and the benefits associated with that?
I'll start on that. I think the main thing is thinking about what we call a preferred partnership. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned that we had, my father's been working in philanthropy for close to 60 years. And it wasn't until 20 years ago, or I think 2003, 2004, where we really learned that if you try to go do all this on your own, you're not going to make that much of an impact. And so, where can we find aligned folks with values, with resources that want to pool that capital together? Like Brian said, close to 1,000 business leaders over the last 20 years that have come together through this preferred partnership model. And what we mean by that, there's kind of three things that we look at in terms of like who we partner with. You want to have an aligned vision in terms of like where are you trying to go on an issue like education. Do we believe together that a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to get us where we want to go with the next generation? And it's really about individualized education and new innovative models to help kids discover their gifts at earlier ages. So I think aligned vision is one, aligned values in terms of how you get there, but then also complementary capabilities. So everyone brings something different to the table. And we're learning a lot on this in terms of really like working on cultural campaigns around issues like addiction, where we haven't participated at all in sports and media and music up until the last like 4 or 5 years. And what that's done is it's really back to the complementary capabilities, people that understand that and really access and how do you message around education, around addiction, whatever the issue is, into these highly influential parts of the economy that we didn't understand before. So preferred partnerships is a huge piece of really, what we're trying to do within Stand Together.
That makes sense. And Brian, on partnerships for you, is there any, perfect, partner that you're looking for? Are there any qualifications that you will or you do want or you don't want that make it good for you?
Again, I think when we talk about applying the lessons of business to philanthropy, these are pretty basic lessons. But, as we said, we're a partnership organization, right? Some of the most successful business leaders in the world come into Stand Together, and many of them come to us after they've already made a bunch of mistakes in their own philanthropy, right? And these mistakes, we learn from them. We try to sort of, share the knowledge as well as pool resources, and bring other people in with the benefit of these lessons. But things like trying to go it alone. You would never try to be everything to everyone in your business. You would look to specialize where you can add value, find trading partners, and you know that together you can win bigger than if you just try to go out on your own. That's how we do philanthropy. That's how we try to solve problems in society. But to make those partnerships work, we use the kind of frameworks that Chase talked about that come from, in this case, the business that he helps to lead. Shared vision. And when we say shared visions, we don't mean we got to agree on everything. I mean, we don't agree with our own team on everything. Can you agree on the issue that you're trying to work? Do you agree that education could be better? Yeah, okay, let's go to the next step. Shared values. Can we trust each other? Are we going to be there for each other? Because this is tough stuff, right? If it's easy, we're probably choosing the wrong problems. Yeah. But the third one is really, really important. This is another mistake I think a lot of people make in their social change work, their philanthropy. Chase talked about complementary capabilities. We take a capability-based approach. So much of philanthropy these days is aspirational, right? We care about these issues, and that's great. But if all we do is care about them and we write a check, but we don't really vet the capabilities to understand whether or not they're sufficient to make the difference, whether or not we're approaching it in a way that's measurable and from an experimental mindset so we can learn from the experiment, apply those lessons, and go forward as we scale, we're not going to win.
Right.
And again, those are pretty basic lessons, but they tend to be pretty absent from the world of social change, trying to solve problems in society. The approach that we're taking invites people in to learn the lessons of the mistakes that we've made in the past so that they don't have to make them again in the future.
Well, that's exactly where I want to go next, Brian, so thank you for bringing it up, mistakes. So Chase, you mentioned misconceptions that you face, but is there any one big mistake that the two of you have made that you look back on and wish you hadn't done that and learned something from it? And Chase, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how long do we have?
There's a lot of them. Yeah.
I mean, whether it's business or on the social change and the philanthropic side, I think what I said before, the biggest one is trying to do it alone, and not really, trying to find partnerships. I think that's one. Brian, I'll let you hit the second one.
Yeah, I think, if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not choosing the right issues. Because again, when you're talking about an issue like education, for instance, 70% of parents today say that they want our education system, K through 12, to be radically different than it is right now. It's a huge market for something different.
Yeah.
I think this comes largely out of the experience that many of us as parents had through COVID. We got a close look at what our kids were actually going through in schools, even some of the best private schools, some of the best public schools, and we said that they could do better.
Yeah.
And so what you've seen over the past 3 or 4 years is this dramatic movement towards better education. And that can take all sorts of different forms, whether it's public education or private education. Mm-hmm. I think that progress, we've been involved, for instance, in policy reforms in 25 states. Mm-hmm. We've helped in partnership with places like the Walton Family Foundation to support over 3,000 education entrepreneurs. There's more than 5 million kids that are now benefiting from those programs. Yeah. Compare that to the lack of progress in terms of educational improvement in the previous 30 or 40 years. I think we made a lot of mistakes in trying to move the ball forward during that period of time. Things like positioning the issue as us versus them. You had to choose public versus private. That was a big mistake. Right. We went into the market 3-4 years ago. We saw this opportunity. And the slogan that we used, the sort of call to action to everyone was, don't force the divorce. Don't make parents choose between good education and their local school. Help to introduce reforms that can help improve all education. When you do that, you get this big tent coalition, and you can create real change for families. So there's a lot of tactical mistakes that we made in the past that help to feed into the solutions.
One other I think is important is we waited too long to really understand the power of bottom-up principle. Bottom-up as opposed to top-down. I think this is a key distinction of how we approach things that stand together. I'll give you one example. Basically, it's almost like a venture capital model where we're betting on people. People that have been through a problem, that really understand it, and they find a better way, as opposed to trying from the top down to say, oh, you guys have these problems, and we're going to tell you how you need to fix your life. So an example of that would be Scott Strode from the Phoenix. We were big supporters of the Phoenix. We met Scott probably 7 years ago.
And what is the Phoenix?
So the Phoenix is basically a program to overcome addiction. Okay. And so Scott Strode battled addiction most of his life, and then he had a mentor that helped him realize that exercise and like getting on a bike and getting in the boxing ring was what helped him overcome his addiction. So when he basically overcame his issues there, he decided, I'm going to dedicate my life to this. I'm going to build a gym, call it the Phoenix, and take the power of exercise, combine it with the power of community, and see if I can help others with the same thing that helped me. Mm-hmm. And so when we met him 7 years ago, I think he had 2 or 3 gyms in Colorado. Now he's helped people in all 50 states. We stand together, and all those business leaders that I've described came behind him with capital and capability and the principles on how to scale his organization. And we've got the musicians and the music industry behind it now. And I think we've gone from several hundred people 7 years ago to about 500,000 people touched this year. Yeah. And so next year it's going to double. It's going to be 1 million. So that's the other thing about Stand Together is we want to focus on things where we can actually drive a movement. I think the word movement is really important. And we actually called the movement with the Phoenix 1 million strong because we wanted to make a meaningful impact in this country on addiction. So anyway, I think that bottom-up principle is a very, very important one. We wish we would have had that insight earlier on.
And Chase, you mentioned venture and VC. So Koch has a venture arm. I want to talk with our last few minutes a little bit about tech and innovation going forward. What is most exciting you coming up in the tech space, and what are you using at Koch?
Yeah, so there's so many things I could talk about. I'll just give you one example with how Koch is using artificial intelligence. I mean, we're experimenting with it clearly across all of our capabilities, whether it's operations, supply chain, sales, and we have a lot of great examples there. But I think the most unique thing we're doing with AI is really trying to capture what we've been talking about a little bit here, our principle-based approach. We have a philosophy that my father and other leaders have created called principle-based management. And we're taking basically all the failures, all the lessons learned, all the readings that my father has, all of his books, and all the data we can get our hands on, both publicly and privately, and trying to create a model similar to what Sal Khan did in education, where he partnered with OpenAI and Sal Khan to basically create a product called Khanmigo, which is a Socratic method of learning for kids. It doesn't give them the answer, it gives them another question, so it teaches them critical thinking. We're trying to do the same within Koch and ultimately stand together around teaching this philosophy that has really been the key competitive advantage, we believe, for Koch and why it's grown the way it has. So we've got, call it Kochmigo, I guess. You know, we're calling it Ask Fred, but it's the same principles with Khanmigo, where instead of maybe a couple thousand employees really understanding these concepts, they're sitting there and they have basically a co-pilot in their pocket around these principles and how to solve daily problems with it. So we think that is it's going to be one of our biggest innovations within the company.
Amazing. Well, I very much look forward to seeing it. So thank you both so much for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristin.
Of course.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.